Sunday night, it's a backstory. I saw the preview for this afternoon, and I was like, wow, this is going to be epic. And then I was lucky enough to get an email asking me, hey, did you want to talk to Dan Van Natta Jr.? And I said, absolutely. Backstory goes into the backstory of LeBron James' decision from 10 years ago. It's this Sunday night, backstory. And Don Van Natta is our guest. He's the host and the executive producer. It's a new ESPN series. You know his work from ESPN and Outside the Lines. And he is kind enough to join us now here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Don, welcome.
Thank you. How you guys doing today?
We're doing great, man. We're excited for the series, and we're excited for this particular episode. You know, it's funny. I just happened to be sitting here in the studio, and they were running a preview, and I was like, man, this is riveting just watching the preview of it. You know, you're sitting down and you're talking about, this infamous moment, and it's almost like people are like, what do you mean infamous? You know, like it's still looked at in such a polarizing regard today about LeBron's quote-unquote decision.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was because it was just the way it was executed, right? That's what we remember. We remember it was just a bad hour of TV. LeBron looked so uncomfortable. It was so awkward. Jim Gray, the host, asked 23 questions before he asked the question, what's your decision? You know, he said, where's the powder? He said, are you a nail biter? Just these comical questions. And, so we all felt watching it like, well, this is just bad television. But it was also the fact that he turned his back on his hometown and in the way he did it in such a high profile way. 10 million people watched. 15 minutes after LeBron said, I'm taking my town to South Beach. Of course, that's a big part of it too, the way he said it. His jerseys were being burned in Cleveland. And when LeBron was shown that night by Mike Wilbon back in ESPN studios, LeBron said, well, I can't be concerned with that. So it was just so much of a shrug. And so what we tried to do with this episode is go back and see the backstory of why the show was done, how it was put together, whose idea was it, and then also the legacy of the show looking back 10 years from now. And a lot of stuff, we didn't realize it that night, but it was the launching pad for a lot of different things: player empowerment, the building of super teams, and LeBron being a storyteller. He's an executive producer now. He's got media companies. It was just announced today $100 million has been raised for a new media company that LeBron and his business partner, Maverick Carter, are putting together. And, our reporting shows that all began that night at the Boys and Girls Club in Greenwich.
The interesting part about this I'd like to hear is, what was the league's reaction to this? I mean, at the time, you mentioned it really, started these super teams and gave the players power. When David Stern was the commissioner at that time, was he supportive of this? Like, hey, LeBron, it's your decision. You go and do what you want. Or were they like, I don't know that I like this idea?
David Stern hated the idea. He didn't just hate the idea. He tried to get the show killed. He called John Skipper at ESPN. We interviewed John Skipper, a top ESPN executive, the former president of ESPN. And Stern called him in the days leading up to it and said, please don't do this. And in my interview with Skipper on camera for Sunday Night's Backstory, Skipper said the reason Stern didn't like it is because one player was getting too large a platform and too much power. And that's what bothered Stern. He was sort of a visionary to know that this was going to trigger what we've seen in recent years where, players, super teams are being built. Players are leaving teams without free agency. They're just like Anthony Davis. They're just being traded, and the agents are putting together these super teams. And I think Stern envisioned that if this happens, we could end up where we are today.
Sunday night, 9 o'clock, backstory on LeBron, the decision. Sunday night, 9 o'clock, ESPN, ahead of the 10-year anniversary of LeBron's decision. Was this LeBron's idea? I mean, was this something that LeBron said, you know what, I really want to do? I want to go on television and make my announcement in this fashion.
It was not LeBron's idea. That's one of the really interesting things that we found out. It wasn't LeBron's idea. It wasn't the idea of anybody around him, Maverick Carter or Rich Paul, who's now his agent. It wasn't ESPN's idea. It wasn't Jim Gray's idea, although Jim has said it was his idea. It turned out it was the idea of a guy named Drew. I don't know his last name. A guy named Drew in Columbus, Ohio, in November of 2009, wrote an email to Bill Simmons to Bill Simmons' mailbag column and said, LeBron should announce his free agency decision live on ABC. Simmons took the idea and pitched it to ESPN executives, pitched it to Maverick Carter, to Leon Rose, LeBron's agent, in February over the All-Star weekend that year in Dallas. There was all sorts of discussions about it for months. And it wasn't until in June that Maverick Carter, Leon Rose, and Jim Gray were at the NBA Finals in L.A., that they had this discussion, and it really took off. And once Ari Emanuel got involved, the Hollywood agent, it was then brought to ESPN and greenlit. So it's a fascinating sort of origin story that nobody knew before we did our reporting on this episode.
Do you think that LeBron sees this as part of his journey, or do you think that there's a little bit of regret in there as well?
Well, certainly at the time, there was a lot of regret. You could see it in the chair. He's uncomfortable. It's almost as if he knows as he's sitting there, this is not a good thing with so many people watching me to turn my back on, my hometown. He just looked so reluctant. And, he was reluctant in the days leading up to it. And he had people on his team warning him that this had the potential to backfire. Leon Rose, the agent, soured on the idea and was advising people this could backfire on LeBron, as was Worldwide Wes. LeBron's agent advisor at the time was also saying this could be a bad thing. LeBron expressed regret for the decision a few months after it happened in 2010. He said he probably would have done it differently. And certainly the way he changed teams, when he went back to Cleveland after 4 years in Miami, where he won 2 titles for the Heat, then he did an as told to essay for Sports Illustrated, where he could very, carefully control that narrative. And then when he went to LA in 2018, it was just a one-page statement put out by Clutch Sports by his agent. So he certainly learned his lesson that way. I think, though, that the guys around him, particularly Maverick Carter, see it as, sort of a teaching moment for them. It was the first time they were producers. It was badly executed, but they learned a lot of lessons. And now they've got, media companies, Uninterrupted, Spring Hill Entertainment. They're, LeBron's the executive producer of all these shows that all these networks are vying for. So they got a taste for it, even though it didn't go well. But now they're really, really good at it.
It is Sunday night, 9 o'clock. Backstory, the decision. Don Von Natta Jr. is with us, the host and executive producer of the show, which sounds like it's going to be a tremendous backstory on this one. And, the one question I guess I would have on this, something like this, was, correct me if I'm wrong, the viewership for this was tremendous for ESPN to not try to do something like this again.
Yes. So the 1 hour decision broadcast was the most watched non-live event in the history of ESPN. 10 million people, an average of 10 million people watched that hour. At 9:28 p.m. Eastern, when LeBron said, "I'm taking my talents to South Beach," 13 million people were tuned in. But the thing that a lot of people forget, and we go into this in the show as well on Sunday night, is that hour didn't belong to ESPN. ESPN donated that hour for free to LeBron James and Maverick Carter. They had sponsors, Nike, Coca-Cola, the University of Phoenix. The money from those sponsors went to the Boys and Girls Club of America, more than $2 million. So ESPN didn't even benefit financially from the biggest audience in its history for a non-live event. And so we go into all of that. And I asked Skipper what the rationale was for doing that, and he gives some pretty compelling reasons on the show.
Now, did you get a chance to first off, did you get a chance to talk to LeBron about what he was like that day? I mean, is he a part of this, to kind of like the preparation that went into it for him? Was he like, pacing back and forth? What was he like in the hours leading up to this?
Well, I should tell you guys that LeBron declined to comment for the episode. He would not sit down with me. 2 years ago, for a show that LeBron did called for ESPN Plus called More Than an Athlete, he sat down with Maverick Carter, Rich Paul, and his chief of staff, Randy Mims. They sat around on couches. There was no journalist there. They just discussed amongst themselves the decision. And LeBron did talk about the backlash that occurred and how much it bothered him when he finally got to Miami that night and he realized how bad it all was. And that Dan Gilbert letter, remember the Comic Sans letter that the owner of the Cavaliers put out that night, ripping LeBron? And so He talks about it himself. So when I asked for him to sit down with us and Maverick Carter, they said they declined, and they feel they've already done it. But I did, through my own reporting, find out some interesting stuff about the run-up to it. LeBron did very little preparation for the interview. He flew that day from his basketball camp in Akron, sponsored by Nike. And he didn't arrive in Greenwich until about 6 o'clock. So just a few hours before the show began, he went to a house in Greenwich, an agent's house that was kind of a green room for the decision. And he spent most of his time recording promos for that night with those sponsors and sort of glad-handing with the corporate sponsors that were there. Jim Gray was there. Kanye West was there. LeBron had dinner with Kanye West that night. Kanye was in attendance at the decision. And so LeBron had no idea how many questions Jim Gray was going to ask. I had people around him tell me that he felt it was just going to be some small talk and then he was going to be asked to deliver his decision. And so despite LeBron and his camp not talking with us, we did talk to quite a few people around him and got a good sense of what that day was like.
Out of everyone that you interviewed, was there something that was eye-popping or surprising to hear?
Well, that's a good question. I definitely think that the Skipper interview, the former president of ESPN, there's a lot of revealing stuff there. For instance, I asked him, did LeBron use ESPN or did ESPN use LeBron? And he kind of smiled and said it was mutual use. He said LeBron used ESPN to get a platform. They asked for an hour of free time and they got it. And that showed the kind of power LeBron wielded in 2010. Which was a good lesson for him going forward. And ESPN used LeBron in the sense of, as Skipper puts it, they were the center of the universe that night. If you wanted to find out where LeBron was going, remember there were 6 teams vying for him in free agency that summer. You had to tune into ESPN, which is why they got the record audience they got.
Do you have any idea how many people were in the room and how you were selected to get in that room? I'm looking at the video now. It looks like like the basketball gym where the Boys and Girls Club, but it looks like there's a couple of rows. Were these just family members or there people like hand selected? How did they get in that room?
It were kids that were basically high school kids and a little bit younger who went to the Boys and Girls Club in Greenwich. And so the organizers there, the people that run that club, hand selected. I mean, it was obviously a tough ticket, the kids that were there. And there was criticism, a lot of media criticism, obviously, about every aspect of the show. And we go into a little bit of that on Sunday night. And even the kids, the use of the kids as sort of a backdrop, there was criticism. The kids were being used as props for this show. So, people criticized LeBron's shirt. They criticized everything about it. And, LeBron was roundly criticized. ESPN was. Jim Gray got a lot of criticism. Just anybody that was involved in it, took a lot of heat when it was all over.
The show is Backstory with Don Van Natta Jr. He's our guest. It's Sunday night, 9 o'clock, the 10-year anniversary of the decision. LeBron James, a little look inside it. Make sure you watch this Sunday night, 9 o'clock. Backstory, the decision. Don, we appreciate the time.
Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, excellent stuff. I look forward to it. I saw the preview today. They were running it on SportsCenter, and I was like, dude, I am locked into this. That is a riveting story, man.
Oh, I can't wait.